Hey everybody in Hot and Healthy Community, I'm back. Technology is still loving us. I still haven't worked out how to make Be Live and living, but we're not going to mess around with that. We're actually going to invite today's guest at 6 p.m, Pat Armitstead, to join us. So I'm going to hit the button. Pat, stay tuned. I'm about to bring you on camera. So Pat and I are going to be talking about grief. All the different types of grief, how to overcome grief. Hey, Pat, and how you can actually see grief as a gift. Pat is the world's first geologist, which she's going to tell more about. I'm going to invite her to share her story in a moment. Yep, check your hair. How's it doing? I seem to have guests on my show or guests here in the community that just have awesome hair. So thank you for having awesome hair. So Pat, we're going to jump straight into it because I know a lot of people are keen to find out more about what a geologist is and to explore the topic of grief, how the different types of grief, how we can overcome it, how we can recognize the signs of grief and the different ways that we can move through it and also see grief as a gift. So first of all, thank you so much for being a guest here in the Hot and Healthy Community. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. It's actually, I'm grateful to you for the prompt. Because I've been unwell, I haven't done any grief work really for the last couple of years, and it's really just brought me present to a whole range of things since our first conversation. So that's been awesome. Thanks.
Oh, you're so welcome. I think it's a really important topic, particularly in our modern societies where we're so disconnected from our emotions. And we don't have communities where we support each other through the different cycles of life and issues. It's kind of like suck it up and get on with life. What's wrong with you? Just pop a pill or it'll pass or just ignore it. And my own personal experience with grief was an interesting journey to realize, well, you know, grief comes in many different forms and everyone processes it differently and it takes different time to process different experiences of grief. So I want to jump into that. First of all, let's talk about how on earth did you become a geologist and what is a geologist?
Well, I need to say at the outset, I didn't learn about joy by studying joy. Joyology came to me as a result of my own experiences of shame, grief, and embarrassment. And I had a series of losses at the turn of the century. And following those losses, my doctor wanted to medicate me. And I said, no, I've been through a lot of grief. Help me deal with my grief. And so everything from that point, it took me on a journey, and it was to condense, it was a chance conversation with a magician in South Australia when I was still in New Zealand. And there was a lull in our conversation, and in that lull, I just got a message, and the message was, oh my God, we've got radiology, pathology, hematology, but no joyology. I'm going to be a geologist. So I had no idea what to do with that. It took me 2 weeks of running around like a dog with a bone till I finally got some kind of sense. I went and did 2 pilot programs, one for 12 weeks and another for 12 months. And it was in that 15-month period that I really could take what I knew from the past, especially from my work as a registered nurse, and then meld some of my more recent learning to create a range of programs. And one of the first programs that I developed was a program called Good Grief. I met 3 Jungian psychotherapists, and we were talking about a lady by the name of Christiane Corbat, who has since passed, but she had been working with women with breast cancer and casting their torsos and making art and meaning out of their experience of their time dealing with their breast cancer. So we worked together and cast each other for a 12-month period, using myth, legends, fairy tales, symbolism, colour, crystals, a whole range of things casting each other and just working with whatever was present. It didn't have to be a biggie. It was more about really experiencing the process for ourselves, and then making meaning and art of that sculpted part. And what we saw as we moved through that was, as we go through the storytelling and talk about the wounding and explore all the feelings of that, and then we capture where we think that's stored in the body, and then remove that cast. It's like a shedding process. And then as you shed, our thinking was, right, we've done the work, so now we can make meaning of this through some artistic expression. So that's when I created the Good Grief program, which was 2004.
Wow, okay. So let's talk about grief. You and I have had a couple of conversations around my own experience and about different definitions of grief. How would you explain, or what would you say is a standard understanding of grief?
I think for the most part, people would think of the loss of a partner or the loss of a child as probably being the major ones that cause them some grief. But there's a more expansive thinking than that. We have so many little losses. You know, every disappointment, every rejection, every time we're turned down for something, it's all creating a sense of loss. If we have surgery, if our body changes, for a woman to have a mastectomy is a huge loss. You know, our breasts are very much a part of our identity as a woman. So there is huge grief. I know I have joint problems this last 2 or 3 years, and there's a level of grief with that. My nimbleness is no longer there. I'm not as flexible now as I was 3 or 4 years ago. And that's been huge for me to come to terms with, well, you know, I'm healing it and I'm getting better, but I may not restore fully that function. So it leaves us with a hole, and that hole needs to be filled. A lot of the spiritual workers talk about woundology, and you know that is really having the preparedness to go and look at your life wounds and see what's really there for you. When I'd had all those losses and then my mother died, and one time when I was just in a little meditative moment, candle burning and thinking about my mother, I thought, oh, I could actually make a wound of this. And I had a photo of Mum, who was on oxygen at the time, but my sister took her to see her first great-grandchild. And Mum was just so full of joy, oxygen, but full of joy, nursing this new little bub. And she actually died 4 days later. And she rang me and she just said, Patricia, he's just so beautiful. He's so beautiful. So there's some kind of, you know, her passing happened, and there's some really sad, glad, poignant but joyous memories, and this is some of the more expansive thinking that I want people to have around loss. You know, I interviewed an old client on the weekend whose son has been a drug addict for 10 years, and that's been a huge journey for her. And you know, one of the things we both agreed was, you know, she had to learn she was not going to change it. And there are some things we can't change, like if someone dies, we can't bring them back. So we need to be looking at things differently. And she said, for a long time, I didn't think I had anywhere to put my love. Where did I put this love that I could no longer give to my son because he's in prison most of the time? I can still love him, but in the physical, there's nothing. So, you know, and for her, that has come through finding work she never dreamed she would have. She's now in this supervisory role, lifting the spirits of people in this workplace, using her own very unique sense of humour in a dynamic that we would never have dreamed she would be in that place. But that's come because she was prepared to look at herself, you know. Where was I in all of this? I was his mother, after all. So, you know, what was occurring in his upbringing that I might have contributed to behaviour that might have led to this. So looking at herself, but also looking at other losses and like her first husband died of cancer, and the grief doesn't fade, or, well, I mean, it will fade, but it doesn't go away. And this client on the weekend, she described it like a ball of wool, and she said when it's raw and open, it's all loose and it's unravelled and it's messy and it's taking up most of my space inside, if I imagined it inside. But when I'm feeling better about things and I've actually got some way to minister to others or be of service, then it's almost like it tidies itself up again. It's still there, but I have this other part of my life happening around it. And I think that's the thing. When we lose somebody, it's just one portion of our life. We don't lose all of our life. In the beginning, it's consuming and it would, you know, take a lot of space and time. But if we grieve and grieve well, then, and, you know, what does that mean? Then passage of time takes us to a place where we have poignant moments still, but we've got fond memories, and very often someone's passing can take us to a place where we want to make a stand for something. You know, so many people I've known over this last 10, 15 years especially, who've lost children or a family member as a result of suicide. They've been so moved by that experience that they've decided, I'm going to do something about this. And so they've made a stand, they've created foundations, they've decided they're going to gather information and they're going to be a voice for that. I know Mike King in New Zealand, a comedian, gave up his comedy career and he works full time now in this space. He travels the country, 200 speaking gigs a year, talking to school children about being heard and giving voice to that emptiness that's there, and helping them learn a level of appreciation. So a lot of people, as a result of loss, and he had his own losses, find meaning and significance through that process, especially if they're searching for something, because we need and want to fill the well.
So one of my questions is, there are different types of grief, and I don't want to trivialize any forms of grief whatsoever. So if I look at my own experience, the loss of my mum, but before that, it was when I had my first burnout, for example, in the corporate world, my loss of identity as a corporate high flyer, when I couldn't maintain that anymore. Who the hell was I? And then I had to reinvent myself, and I went into the wellness space, which was great, but I took my high flying headspace with me into the wellness space, and then I burnt out. And then I looked at that and went, oh, now I've lost that. So who am I actually? And this whole kind of process of grieving each stage. And then as I got older, looking at, oh, I got some wrinkles and I'm drying out and my body doesn't do things like it used to. Things are changing. It's a grief of youth. And then grief of loss of, friends, family who died for different reasons, who've passed over. There's the loss of pets. There was the loss of, for example, changing countries, leaving behind, a support network and familiarity and even physical space, and not realizing that all these things, if not dealt with, compound to the point where there's a physical, psychological, spiritual depletion and a burden that needs to be dealt with at some time. And I love the fact that you are a joyologist, because one of the things I'm very aware of is when I work with clients and I'm doing holistic coaching, is one of the key things I ask them is, how would you rate your level of joy? And I don't mean your ability to laugh at a comedy, but that sense of lightness, that sense of ease in that joy, that playfulness, that curiosity, I think for me it's that lightness. And I completely had underestimated the impact of various forms of compounding grief events, the accumulative effect of not dealing with those and recovering properly. And the only reason I knew it was an issue was I was staring at depression and staring at ill health in my mental health and going, what's going on with this? There's no big deal in my life. Sure, I lost my mum and I lost a couple of friends, but I should just be pulling up my big girly panties and getting back out there and doing my thing at the same level I was doing it before. And actually, you physically, mentally, spiritually can't. It's a time of care.
No. And I think for us white folk, we've lost touch with our culture is not rich in tradition and ceremony and ritual. We hardly come together to sit at the table for a meal, as we might have in times past. And other cultures are so steeped in those things. So for many and varied events, difficult times, then they have ceremony and ritual and traditions that help fulfill them and help them move through that period. In the Maori culture, they might stay with the person who's passed for 4 or 5 days, and everyone's there. They're all talking and engaging to the body that's in the room and the spirit that's remained, and they say what they need to say and they feel what they need to feel. And I worked a lot years ago with Italian and Greek cultures, and they are just so fully self-expressed. If they need to wail, they'll wail. And so in their bodies, they are free. We tend to pack it down, put it away, tidy it up, get back on with things. And when we do that, we're actually lining ourselves up for disease. I had some violence in my first relationship, and I never told anybody. Long story around that. Story's not important. But I didn't tell anyone for 35 years. And then I ended up needing a hip replacement, and through some processes became aware of, yes, look at this, left without a leg to stand on, can't support myself, can't stand it anymore. All that languaging that would have been going on at a subconscious level, if it's not being expressed, it'll get stored somewhere. So for me, it went to my right hip. And then, subsequent healing, I had some cellulitis. What I know to be true for me is in this huge amount of cellulitis that came up, here's all my lingering anger and resentment being released. And our body is a really good indicator of where we're at with things. but we've got to get present. So the journey with grief is an inner journey. We need to explore and find time. You know, I talk a lot about the terrible Ds, the death, the divorce, the depletion, the depression, the deprivation. And, you know, grief comes as a result of many and varied things, but grief is grief. You know, my grief for, I lost my first child, is no different to the grief you had with your mum. Grief is grief. It's all the same. The thing that's different is the more we have loved, then the bigger the gap with the passing, and the bigger the gap. So we get a reality slap, and then we've got this gap, and the bigger the gap, then the longer it can take to heal, and the more work that might need to be done to allow that healing. And, you know, then finding ways and means and processes to support us to be with it. And well, certainly move through that acute phase. These days they tend, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross used to have, you know, 5 stages of grief, and we still cycle in and out of that and experience different emotions. But more now when people are talking about grief, they're talking about storytelling, being able to share vulnerably, to give other people that. It's a gift that we give other people. You know, we give other people permission, consciously or unconsciously, when we can share vulnerably. So not everyone is ready for that. So, you know, being able to create really high trust environments where deep intimacy can occur has been a big part of my work. It's like I need to, if I create that platform in my Good Grief program, create a space through shared storytelling where people feel they are a trusting environment. So then they can share vulnerably, and then we can do work that we can do anything. I remember once I got into bed when I was doing that, one of the pilots in aged care. I got into bed with a 93-year-old lady, and I spent the whole day in bed with her. No one had any idea why I was doing that. I was dressed as a clown, and I granted her every wish. I said, what do you want for breakfast? And she said, oh, well, you know, we only have porridge. I said, not today. I said, you fancy bacon and eggs? And she said, oh, we never have that here. And I said, we do today. And pressed the bell and ordered bacon and eggs. And we enjoyed that for 2, of course. And then mochaccino. She enjoyed mochaccino. And the day unrolled, and until the staff got tired of responding to because they had no idea why I was doing it. And indeed, even if I was allowed. And when they started complaining, I got out of bed and I chucked a wobbly like a little 2-year-old on the floor until they agreed to comply. And I talked to the staff later and I said, Goldie, this lady I've been in bed with all day, is crippled with pain. Her hands were turned back on themselves. They were so twisted with arthritis. I said, but she never complains. She's 100% with it. She's a good patient. And because she's a good patient, no one engages with her. And I shared what I learnt about her in bed with her that day, which was heaps of intimate stuff. And the staff were going, oh my God, I didn't know that. And I tell people now, you know, even in a business setting, I've got photos of that day. And, you know, I say, you've got to get into bed with your customers. She trusted me. 93-year-old women don't let 50-year-old women into their bed. She trusted me. And in that space, you know, something magic happened. And so it's about creating that space. And when we can go to all the wonderful memories, revisit because there's always good, even if things have been bad, there's always good parts. So it's not every part of a past relationship that we hate or didn't like. So it's all those threads. And we give people a real gift when they can revisit that, and things can be put to rest again at another level. And that's an ongoing process as far as I've been able to see. Things are never totally resolved, in my view. If we're triggered in some way, things may come up again for examination. And we learn something else, something new. And this is part of our evolving consciousness, to be in that place.
So looking at the fact that we are a Western society, and for the most part, many of us aren't encouraged to explore our feelings of grief and our experiences of grief. We don't understand it, therefore we don't know how to process it effectively or take the gifts from it. What can we, my own personal experience was I didn't want to burden anyone with my issues, right? And here Nicole is again with another, I'm a verbalizer. So one of my ways of processing my experiences is externally, and I need to do it in words. And actually I'll do it with half a dozen people. So, until I'm done, until I'm done, I'm not done. Even I had some sexual abuse in my childhood, and one of my ways of processing that as a 9-year-old was to tell everyone and tell everyone and tell everyone until I felt like it was out of me. Even at that age, I knew I needed to get it out of me. Otherwise it would fester and make me sick at some level. I didn't quite know that I was processing it my way, and I didn't complete that and I kept attracting certain things, but until I'd actually recognized, oh, this process hasn't been finished, it kept showing up in my life. And so this time when it happened, I was like, I can't really talk to everyone because everyone's got their own stuff and we're Westerners and I don't really know how to process grief. And actually some of it I thought was I was actually quite hard on myself and thought, I'm just not strong enough to deal with shit, like I'm emotionally weak or I'm incapable, and I started to have some very not good thoughts about myself. But it was just that I did not have the understanding and the tools or even the language around how to express, oh, this is grief. Oh, I get that. How can we help people in societies where we don't have a culture of mourning, of grieving, of releasing? How can we help them with some simple tools to recognize it and deal with it in an effective way so they can gain the gifts from the experience of grief?
Yeah. Some very valuable things that I've used for many, many years. Journaling is a wonderful process to be able to put on the page daily what's going on for you. To get all the stuff out of your head and onto the page is very releasing. And if you journal over time and then go back some months and look at what you wrote 3 months ago, you'll see a significant difference and evolution in your language, the words you're using, any expressions, and you'll see the shift and change that's occurring. So that's one way. Creative expression is another way to make art, and it doesn't mean you have to be a proper artist, but about using drawing to just get some feeling onto the page, onto the canvas, or find the colours that are expressing what it is that you're feeling. Trusted relationships are brilliant. Learning to be with yourself is a biggie for a lot of people. Some people find that quite hard. So finding ways to do that, meditation, guided meditations, I think are particularly useful when people are moving through a grief process. And then, creating, I've had many and varied little altars that I've set up for myself where I'm using photos perhaps of people who've passed or other memorabilia that has significance and meaning for me. And then I won't say, well, I do invest in a form of prayer, in spending quiet time, sending thoughts, and making that intention to connect with something. You know, asking for advice, asking for guidance, asking for help from the ether, from another world. And we often receive that in little messages. A prompt will come in about reading a book, might be guided to a website. Somebody might say, oh, you need to meet so-and-so. And all of these are little pathways that are showing us, while we're experiencing this challenge, support is actually coming in. You know, in the beginning, this pain can be so big we don't necessarily always see the support, but as we come to terms with things, then some of these other things become more evident. And you know, we've got a head brain, which we know, but we've also got a heart brain and a gut brain. And where most of us are, you know, very stuck up here and guided by up here, or in conflict with the others for up here. But if we can get more into our heart and allow that heartfelt expression in whatever form it takes. When I discovered that I could make a wound of this last photo of my mother, I thought, oh, I know what I can do now, because I did special effects makeup and we learned a lot with latex. So I started making wounds. I had 7 major wounds that I went back and looked at over about a 12-month period. So there was, you know, one breakup relationship that was kind of all splintered. You know, I just looked for the language that let me represent on the page what was happening, and it was all so freeing to get it out of here and onto there. Then you're not carrying it anymore. A client, I'm just writing a chapter for someone else's book, and I'm sharing a story of a client who had breast cancer, healed her first breast cancer with just one meditation, and within 12 months was totally free. She was wonderful. And then 5 years later, cancer came back, and she'd never been able to make any inroads on her Parkinson's. And she said to me, I'm going to surrender to this cancer this time because I don't want to die of Parkinson's. She said, I think I could fight it, but I don't want to die of Parkinson's. And so we went on a journey in the next 12 months, profound intimacy. She went back and visited every conversation that might have had a nuance of a bad moment, and made peace with her past. Every conversation, you know, the tiniest one where, oh, you know, I said that and you might have been upset. So, you know, they were all small things. And we made this piece of art, and it's called Threads of Life, Holding On and Letting Go. So being able to almost let those things pass through your hands, to feel the threads, to feel the sacred moments, to visit it all, does require, you've got to give it time. So, you know, we've got to take time out from the busy life to be with these things that will come up for us. And along that pathway, it's been my learning especially, we so then get in touch with such deep layers of our intuitive self. We get access. You know, our soul has been torn, and we don't just see our own suffering. We look out then and we really see and appreciate the suffering of the world. And in that place then, for everyone, there's some way in which they see how they can be a contribution. So, you know, that,
lovely.
Whether it's just with a neighbour or, you know, setting off on a on a pilgrimage of some kind, something happens.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much. So you and I talked about how we are in need of people that can educate us and guide us through the journey of grief. What is it that you offer around the good grief? Like, what is the good grief process that people can do with you?
I have a 3-day workshop, which is for small groups, usually about 12 people, and they're taken on a journey. It's totally choreographed to specific pieces of music over the 3 days, some that they can hear and some they can't. It's just played in the background.
Wow.
And they're led through being able to express their story. We work with the emotional body, identify where their pain is stored, and they cast each other and make art and meaning of what's been going on. When I'm working with clients one-on-one, about 4 or 5 years ago, learned embraining. I don't know if you've heard of that, but we have the 3 brains: a head, heart, and gut brain. Why do we call the heart and the gut a brain? Well, there's enough neural network, and it's been demonstrated now how much they relate to each other. And Marvin Oka and Grant Sisula developed a process to have the 3 brains talk to each other. So happy to share a sample of that with you sometime if you'd like to explore it. Have a look at it.
Absolutely.
And I just love it because we get to really see how we shut down the heart. And, there are so many people who have gut problems at the moment. You would know this big time. And very often when I'm talking to people who are moving through grief and loss or trauma, their gut is totally shut down, right? There's no courage. They can't access courage. And your intuition actually comes from your gut as well. So they're just devoid of feeling. And the embraining process, number one, helps them to see that, and then we can do a restorative process to gradually bring those things to be more alive. And with that process, what used to take me perhaps 6 or 8 weeks in the past can happen now perhaps in 3 or 4 sessions. People always see in the first session exactly where each of the brains are, and they're always surprised. And then having been awakened, if you like, takes courage, because you've got to be prepared to go and look at what's really hurting. And sometimes it's been squashed down so much. It's people are dead inside, and I think a lot of the people that I've seen with acute or enduring depression, they're dead inside. So reawakening that takes a range of strategies. So the embraining and the Good Grief program, and my coaching is very much intuitive. I'm very perceptive. I see things, and so as people talk and engage with me, I'm able to see some joy where they cannot. So it's almost like peripheral vision is gone, and so there's this narrow view, and I totally understand where only pain exists. But being the observer, I'm able to see beyond that and support them by showing them what I can see. And in doing that, people get insights and more awakening. And I love puns and metaphor. I've been gathering them all my life. So being able to bring things like that which help interrupt a pattern that might not be serving, or helps give substance and meaning where they've been striving to get it but can't make it.
They
So
can't
being able
access it.
to, yes, help them get access.
I love it.
I
And so
had,
through that process, you know, that's how you discover the gifts that are in grief. Like grief is a normal human emotion. It's a normal human experience. It doesn't make you weird or strange that you're going through like a dip in your ability to function or, you know, I use mine as a great example. I used to be able to get on stage. Well, at a period of time I was on stage, you could ask me anything and I was performing at a very high level under a lot of stress. But when I was going through grief, I could almost access that at great struggle and great exhaustion. It would take me 2 or 3 days to recover from, you know, 15 minutes on stage. And it was because I didn't have the reserves. And there was nothing wrong with me. I was simply recovering from grief. So to be kind to myself, to understand, to be patient, to learn the language of how to ask other people for what I needed, and to be okay with tears in public. And that was, you know, I came from a corporate background. You didn't cry nowhere. You know, you didn't even cry in the shower because it meant something was wrong with you. So, you know, being okay to feel emotions as a human being and go through the full journey of that and to go, well, I actually developed a curiosity around grief going, oh, it's still there. Oh, it's popped up. Oh, what can I learn from this? What am I trying to tell myself? How can I grow from the experience of having grief? And I love that you have a workshop that helps people to move through it, because it can be a little lonely and a little disorientating, and to also come through it more resourceful and more capable than before they went in. So I think that's fantastic. Thank you so much for having a good grief program.
Yeah, I think perhaps one of the, someone years ago gave me probably the highest compliment. She said to me, Pat, I've never met anyone who is as present to life as you are. And so I really valued that, and I thought about that a lot, and it probably has been there from my nursing days. We needed to be very present. And then when I toured with Patch Adams, I returned from that tour. It was a sad, glad experience, seeing children in such stark poverty, conditions they lived in. But also, you know, we were present to it all. We allowed ourselves to experience it all. And because we did that, I returned feeling more vital and alive than I'd ever felt in my whole life, even though there were so many sad stories. You know, so much was very heart-moving experience for me. But because we all allowed ourselves to experience it all, then we were just so present. We still engaged. That was 2004. And some have disappeared into the ether, but I still engage with about 8 or 10 people from that tour. Once a month, we engage in some form. So, you know, that deep sense of connection, the shared journey, you know, that's what we foster when we allow others in. When we allow others in, and we get
And so
to see.
if someone's listening to this or either live or on a recording, and they're thinking, well, I'm not sure am I experiencing grief, or I'm not sure I understand it, or if I've dealt with grief, how can they reach out to you so they can, you know, rediscover joy, and learn and grow through the experience and be stronger as a result of it? Where can they reach and connect with you?
Well, they can email pat@geology.co.nz or go to my website, geology.co.nz. And I'm really happy to have an introductory session and just, you know, talk to people. I've got a private group on Facebook at the moment called Unleashing Brilliance, which is all about helping people move through some of the blocks and barriers, and be able to find full expression now. Where now? You were talking earlier about the, you know, feeling lost, and if I'm not that, then who am I? And the universe is requiring us all to step up. You know,
It's time. It's definitely time.
Yeah.
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 And on the time, we've run out of time. I could talk to you for hours. I have talked to you for hours many times, and it's just such a joy. But we do need to wrap it up. So thank you so much for bringing your expertise and your experience here to the community. I really do appreciate it. You're very welcome. So I'll say goodbye for now, and we'll see you again soon, I'm sure.
Good night.
Good night.
Okay.
And to everyone else who's still here in the Hot and Healthy community, I hope this was a great night for you. We've had 2 incredible guests live in the and just forget about any technology issues. We're here live in the Hot and Healthy community every Tuesday, where I'm interviewing people either on the Hot and Healthy show, or because in addition to that, or as an aside to that, they can bring great value to the community. We're all about being hot in business and healthy for life. And I will always keep bringing you great people, great experts, even products and services that I know that can help you to make great choices and have the best possible life that you can create for yourself. So I'll see you again next Tuesday. In the meantime, be hot and healthy. Ciao for now.